In this video, we're going to look at Ode to Grayson Perry Urn, and one of the things about this poem is the references to culture that maybe are a little bit beyond the average reader. So particularly for anybody sitting this examination, this is going to be completely lost. What it does represent is a culture that is very different probably to the one that most of you will have grown up in, and certainly some of the references won't be culturally significant. So it's interesting that this poem is included in the anthology because it does kind of alienate the large majority of the readers for this particular examination, and that's why people don't enjoy it. It's very difficult to understand and difficult to ascribe any meaning to when you can't really attach emotional significance to some of the cultural references. So we'll just pick up on some of the main ones really, but again, if you don't kind of understand all of the references, it's not the worst thing, because the whole point is it's kind of narrowing a reader down to somebody who can experience and understand that culture that's being referred to. What is important is to be able to explore some of the poetic features that are being employed very deliberately, because this whole poem is almost like an expose on the critique of art and culture, and there is this kind of almost satire, I guess, in the depiction of the way in which we analyse and the way in which we refer to classical culture. And it is ironic that a lot of the references here are not particularly high culture, but it does mimic the process of us using the past to try to reflect meaningfully on how we live our lives in the present. The difference being that our kind of recent past for us in this generation is less kind of significant than a past in Keats's original poem, which is obviously the satirical reference to the Ode to a Grecian Urn, which was Keats's original poem, in which he uses a far more highbrow culture to reflect on how man has developed since this piece of art. It's very different. This Grayson Perry Urn doesn't quite have that sort of highbrow cultural significance, and yet what the narrator wants to do is explore the way that we use art and the way that we refer to art as a critique, and a way in which we can kind of view through the lens of human interaction. So the element of voyeurism is definitely still present in this poem, and it's actually quite inventive the way in which we can look at the perspective here. A lot of the poetic features are for deliberate effect, which is very different to some of the other poems in the anthology. There's actually an awful lot more references to poetic technique in this poem than there are in many of the others, and yet they're hidden. They're not quite as obvious as some of the other ones, particularly when you look at the deliberate use of iambic pentameter on occasions in this poem. And again, this is a sort of an ode, a mockery even, to the way in which sort of iambic pentameter reflects highbrow culture and highbrow art. And in this instance, it's being used to obviously mock a culture that is certainly not the one that's trying to be depicted. The regularity of the rhyme scheme is important. The use of kind of regular stanza structures is important. And within all this kind of artistic creation in this poem, all that is being created is this reflection of a life in which there was no consistency, no originality. It's just this sort of loutish culture that's being seen through to the end.